Hey maker, how many times have you been told that to take better product photos, you need to buy a professional camera, expensive artificial lighting, or use a pro editing software like Photoshop? Well, I'm here to tell you that results don't magically happen by buying a professional camera or expensive equipment. Results happen with deep learning. I often get comments on my videos like, what if I don't have or cannot afford all of the fancy equipment, backdrops, etc., like you're using? I'm not going to go out and spend thousands on what you have. I need cheap and simple. I get it. Once you have the knowledge, fancy and expensive equipment typically just leads to faster results. Now, I've been a photographer for over 20 years, so I have a very deep level of learning when it comes to taking product photos. But as a coach to makers and a mom of 3 boys in pretty much every sport, what I don't have is time. Right now, in this moment, my time is my currency. And I'm willing to spend money to save me time. That is why a lot of times you will see me using expensive equipment. Stick around because in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it can be to get results without all that fancy equipment. If this is your first time joining me, my name is Christina Nicole, and I'm a product photography coach teaching makers like you how to take your own high quality product photos that actually attract more customers and make more sales for your product-based business. First, I'm going to walk you through this very basic and inexpensive setup. The table is my dining room table. I just turned it sideways and brought it close to my light source, which is natural light. I made these backdrops out of white foam board and contact paper that I picked up at Walmart. They are connected with these little replica stands connected in the corners here and here. You can easily pick up something super similar on Amazon, and I'll link that in the description below. Let's talk about our light quickly. So I am using natural light. Today is actually a rainy, very overcast day, which sometimes can present problems when shooting with a smartphone, but I think we're gonna be good to go. Because we already have clouds in the sky, we're not seeing a lot of hard defined shadows on our setup. Basically what that means is you see hard shadows when your light source is either really small or really far away. Okay, now the sun is a huge light source, but it's so far away in comparison to our setup that it typically produces hard to find shadows. The clouds are currently acting like a layer of diffusion, but they're super, super far away as well. So I went ahead and added another layer of diffusion in our window right next to my setup. What's in the window currently is called clear plastic poster board, and you can pick it up at Michael's for just a few dollars. Another option is corrugated plastic poster board. It's a little more expensive, but also available at Michael's for under, I think, $6. So we talked about our natural light source and what our weather conditions are today. Talked about how I've added an additional layer of diffusion into the window, not only to kind of reduce intensity of light on this side of the setup, but also to soften the shadows a little bit. Next, we're going to add reflection to this side so that the light coming in the window can hit the reflector and bounce back off. This is just a tri-fold poster that I picked up at Walmart. They come in bigger sizes. You can just get a regular white foam board. A lot of different options to use. We're going to take this and we're going to put it here so that when the light comes in the window, it's going to hit this, bounce off, and fill in over here. What that's going to do is it's going to kind of even out our light, and it's going to fill in the shadows even more. If you really struggle to make natural light work for you, I highly recommend checking out my 5-day challenge light. You can get more information by clicking up here, or you can grab the link in the description below. So we covered the backdrops and we covered light. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the product and the props that are in this image. So I ran to Walmart quickly last night and I did spend about $60 on the majority of the props and everything that are in this photo, including the materials that I purchased to make these two backdrops. Keep in mind, as a maker, more than likely, you're going to be able to utilize similar props and backdrops for your specific product and brand, okay? So investing a little bit of money into quality props is going to just elevate the overall quality of your images. So I did purchase this plant, which it came in like a little black planter. So I purchased this gray planter separate. Keep in mind, the mindset that I had was that the gray would coordinate well with the gray in the backdrop here. I did purchase 2 white foam boards and 2 rolls of contact paper as well. I purchased this little soap dish and I purchased these, it came in an all-in-one packet. There's like a little tray with your toothbrush holder and your soap dispenser. And I also purchased this towel here. I already had these 2 bathroom type scrubbers and I already had the bamboo toothbrushes, which I purchased on Amazon. I'll link those in the description below. So keep in mind, if you're a soap maker creating a beautiful scene like this, where you can take your different scents and just plug and play them into the setting, is going to be worth the $60. Now let's talk a little bit about the creativity that went into this shelf concept. So this shelf, this piece of wood here, I literally pulled off the wall in my house on a 3-tiered shelf that I already had. I pulled it off the wall. I put an old pot underneath it to give it some height. I put a kettlebell on one end to balance out the weight to make sure it was level and sturdy. And then I took just a white towel and covered that up because that's bright blue and we don't want that bright blue casting back onto our setup. So color cast is a real thing. The clothes you choose to wear, the elements you have in your image, light can reflect off of them and cast the color back onto the setup. So we want to make sure that we aren't using really bold, bright colors unless that's part of your branding and part of your image overall. Okay, now we're going to jump into the camera and I'm going to talk a little bit about the composition and some of the stuff I did. So what I'm kind of looking at here is I want my soap to be centered in the tray. I want to make sure that I can see all of my soap. So we're going to have a little bit of negative space here with that line. And then what I kind of want to create the perception of is a little bit of similar space between our elements on this side and our elements over here. Just making sure my lines aren't like, now see how that's like exactly the same. I don't like that. I'm also watching my spacing here. So I move that back a little bit. So equal space here. Making sure everything's lined up and straight. Now I was kind of going back and forth whether or not, and I like to use a little tack to put things in place. It's kind of going back and forth on having this be there versus that little setup. I don't think I like that. So just play with things, move your props around. May end up being that I'm just using this as a like a propper to prop this one up. So not only do we read images left to right, we've got a lot of white brights here. We're going to come in, we're going to see this greenery. We're going to stop because it's a darker color. It takes up that whole side. So we're going to go bam, stop, and we're going to follow the leaves kind of down here to the product. And this is part of creating composition to where we lead the eye towards the elements. As I mentioned before, when choosing these props, I kept kind of a general color theme going here. So we've got the gray in the background, we've got the gray in the marble. Now this background is a little busy, but we're going to blur it and soften those lines a little bit. Anytime you have lines or patterns in your image, you need to make sure that they are straight. So when I made these backdrops, I had to be really careful to make sure I kept a straight line across that white foam board so that when I went to set it up, it was straight within the setup. And actually that is straight. Anytime you are setting up, this is called an L-shaped setup, you want to make sure that backdrop is behind your flat drop. Do not rest it on top of your flat drop because then you're going to see the actual seam. So the pot, I've already mentioned, I matched with the gray. We also have the natural bamboo toothbrushes. This is handmade natural soap. We kind of kept that warm element there, warm, warm, and then the actual shelf is kind of that warm wood too. Next, we're going to jump into the actual camera and we're going to talk a little bit about our settings here. So right now I'm in photo. I want to actually shoot this in portrait mode because I want to blur that busy background. I want to blur all the elements and really put a nice focus on my product. And to do that, I do need some space between my product and the other elements. I got about 10 inches there, I think, between the background and the product. So we're going to move into portrait. And you'll notice when we do that, it goes to 2x. We're going to tap that 2x and we're going to go back to 1. And then we're going to tap where our soap is and we're going to hold. And that's going to allow us to lock focus and exposure. But we can still make exposure adjustments. So a really cool trick that I like to do inside of a smartphone, because when you're learning a lot about light, sometimes it's hard to tell if you have more light on one side versus the other. So to increase exposure on an iPhone, and this is an iPhone 15 Pro Max, you just drag your finger up and you'll see that sunshine. Now, I am intentionally going to blow out this photo because I want to really shoot that exposure up so I can see where I have more of a presence of light. So if you'll notice on the left side here, the left blew out a lot more than the right, but it's not a huge difference. And why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to make a determination as to whether or not I want to use another layer of diffusion right here. So let me actually take that layer of diffusion down. Let's bump that exposure all the way up. And let's see what happens when I set this up. See how it kind of, we got more of the marble filled in on the left-hand side. Let me remove it again. If you have a high intensity of light on one side of the image versus the other, you can continue adding layers of diffusion. The thing we need to be careful about, every time we add a layer, some of the light is being absorbed. So we've got to be mindful of not having enough light, especially when using smartphones. Now, I have access to multiple phones just because of the number of people in my family, and I use a variety from an iPhone 13, 14, 14 Plus, 15, and 15 Pro Max, and I get great results really from all of them. Another thing, another trick that I like to do is keep in mind, we want to get as close as we can to the product. We want to frame it really well on the camera because with smartphones, we have limitations with the number of pixels we have. And what that means is if you have your camera really far back and you have to crop a lot of the image out, well, you're cropping those pixels and it's reducing the overall quality. So you'll notice that you can see the edges of my, setup. So one thing I like to do is just zoom in a little bit and make sure my framing looks really nice, because that's more than likely how I am going to go crop it in editing. So it's just a cool little trick. Those are two things that I like to do before I actually start shooting. So now I'm going to zoom back out. Nope, don't want that. And so I'm going to shoot this way, and then I'm going to crop in editing. Now, take note, I am shooting landscape. To me, landscape is the most versatile, because later on, if I wanted to, I could crop this to a vertical, and then I would have both. I know that we're used to picking up our phones, shooting up and down. Get into the habit, turn your phone sideways, shoot in landscape. You can then crop to square, you can crop vertical, you can do all different crops with a landscape. And most platforms where you're selling are either going to be a rectangle, a landscape like this, or they're going to be square. So just keep that in mind. I also highly recommend using a tripod and using a Bluetooth shutter release to actually capture the image. The reason I recommend those is because smartphones can have problems with image stabilization. So you even holding the phone or tapping the phone to take the photo could cause camera shake, which won't make your image as sharp and in focus. It's just better quality. Okay, so let's get this baby done. I am going to tap and set focus on the product. I'm going to hold to lock that focus and exposure. I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit. I try two things when I'm doing that. I try to make sure that the product and any of the elements, they aren't getting overexposed. And second, you want to make sure the product is staying true to color. I have noticed in these newer smartphones about the past 2 years that if you increase exposure too much, some of the colors can get very saturated looking. So just keep in mind, we want to get a good exposure prior to shooting, but we also can make edits in the software after. So I've got my focus, I've got my exposure the way I want it. Next, I want to potentially adjust the blur a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and take an image, and I'm going to go, I want to zoom in a little and check out the edges of the product, because sometimes the edges can get kind of wonky and not super in focus. So you have to be careful of that when it comes to portrait mode. If that ends up happening to you, in the top left here, you will see an F. We're going to tap that. And default is 2.8. You can use that slider and move it to about a 4.0 or even a 5 or 5.6, depending on your type of product and the detail it has. Because portrait mode can have some limitations, especially if your product edges have a lot of detail in them. Okay, we're going to capture that photo. I'm going to make one more adjustment. Now keep in mind, you can, if you capture this photo and you end up taking into editing and you're zooming and it's off, keep in mind on iPhone, you can go into your images, click edit, and you can adjust the blur in editing, which is really cool. Now we're going to take this photo into my favorite free editing software, Snapseed. Once we are in the app, we're going to go to the bottom and select Tools. Now, basic edits that you should be making are making sure that your exposure is good. We're going to make sure the color of your product is right. And we're going to make sure that we properly resize it for whatever platform you are using. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to go into the Curves tool. Now, when it comes to the Curves tool, what we're going to do is the top right is going to be like our light colors, our highlights, and the bottom left is going to be darks. You'll see kind of this histogram here. The left starts with our dark tones, and all the way to the right is our lighter tones. So it's just a tonal range of lights and darks in our image. So this is more of a selective way to edit those. Because you'll notice if I tap a dot up here and go to increase this exposure, we're kind of washing out some of the darks a little bit. Grab that dot, increase. So to kind of bring the product back to its real color, its actual color, we're going to tap a dot on the left bottom, and we're going to kind of bring those darks back down. This is going to make the greenery look nice and green. It's going to bring the product back to true color. Biggest thing you have to keep in mind is if you go too far, the colors can become very saturated and look kind of weird. So you're just going to move, once you get your whites where you want them without blowing out any detail, that's blowout. So we want to keep, the biggest thing I'm looking at, because A, it's closest to the light, and 2, it has a lot of texture, is this towel. So I'm just, see, there's blowout. I'm just wanting to keep it to where we can still see kind of the fuzzy detail in the towel. And once we're there, I'm going to grab my dark dot, and to make adjustments to it, the dot has to be blue. And sometimes it can be a little booger to snag. And then I'm really watching the leaves, making sure I'm not oversaturating them, and the product. So it's a little dark and saturated. And it just takes a little playing, but it gives you a little bit more control over your actual lights and darks, your tonal range altogether. Trying to watch this brush too to make sure we're not blowing out any detail on that brush. We'll bring that back down a little bit. Okay, put the check mark in the bottom right hand corner. Now overall my whites look pretty true to white, but we're going to go into white balance. That's our next tool. And if you go to the right, it's going to get real warm. If you go to the left, it's going to get really cool. So if you have whites in your image, you want to really focus on those whites looking true to real life. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with my overall color temperature in my whites. Maybe I'll uptick it by 1, make it just a tad bit warmer. You can also hold down on the screen, and you're not going to see a huge adjustment, but if you hold down on the screen, it'll show you your before and after. Next, we're going to go back into the tools, and we're going to go to crop. I'm going to select a 4:3 aspect ratio. That's what came from my camera, but I want to kind of frame this product a little bit better. Make sure it's really the focus. Now I mentioned before, if we crop too much, we're cropping, see all that external, we're cropping out those pixels, which is reducing our overall quality. There's a lot of things that play into overall image quality, but this is a big component. So my general rule of thumb is that we are not going to remove more than 1/4 to 1/3 of the photo. And I tend to try to keep my product within the center and then in that lower 2 quadrants there of the grid. And I'm happy with that. Now there's a lot of other great tools inside of Snapseed, but I have an entire series for free available on my channel. So just click that link in the top right hand corner, or you can grab it in the description below to learn everything about this amazing free software. And here is our final image. Please take the time to like this video if you found it useful, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to learn more about taking your own high quality product photos. See you next time.